Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat, and with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio, and I thank all of you for again taking the time to join us and for blessing us with your attention. Just pray that we honor that gift and that we deliver unto you some important information and helping you to decipher the illusion parading as reality, that we bring some semblance of truth to your life and that it impact you in a way that is meaningful. And tomorrow night, I released in the show description that I will be joining, Andy Hoy will be joining me for a talk, and it's been a long time since he's come on to do any broadcasts. We're going to be speaking about the Wilderness Tabernacle and the specifics of it. And so I thought I'd invite Andy here just for a short synopsis on what we're going to be covering tomorrow evening, and also to let you know about his latest work as far as the images and also the book that he has been working on in connection to this project. And so, Andy, are you there, brother?
I am. Can you hear me, Zen?
Yeah, excellent. And you sound loud and clear. And so, if you would, talk a little bit about what you've been up to with regard to the project and what it's about for those that may not know, and then, list where people can go to find your work, support you, and to learn more.
Sure, thanks.
No
I guess to start out, Project 314 is the title of the project. The website is project314.org, and it's called Project 314 because 314, it's a multiple of pi. And for those who are, I guess, mathematically inclined, we have pi being the relationship between a circle's circumference and its diameter. And basically, this project began, I was studying in Exodus a few years ago, and I stumbled upon the tabernacle curtains. I wasn't doing anything, studying a tabernacle in any way before, and I saw this curtain description and realized that if you connect the curtains by different edges, that it tallies up to 314. So I got to thinking, wow, this thing is round. And so I guess, long story short, I go through all that detail, going back to the Hebrew, and basically I've proven a round structure. So everything that I've been doing since then is very much in support of not only that thesis, or proving it, sharing it, and everything like that. Just so I'm trying to get to people's attention to sort of change the paradigm. This is the house of God. The first before any of the temples were built, the tabernacle came to be. So this is the scheme. It's thus saith the Lord type of construction and revelation, and I think it's pretty exciting that after over 2,000 years that this is now being shown to us again. So
I'm hearing some clicking. Are you typing or
no,
anything?
no, just holding. Is it? I guess I don't know what type of clicking it sounds like, but
Yeah, I'm not sure, but it's just almost like typing on a keyboard. But anyways, really quick, can you tell us about how this diverges from the normality as far as the accepted premise for the shape and the nature of the tabernacle?
Sure. So the nature of this, after I've deciphered all the wood planks and the curtains and the leather, all the layout. Basically, the tabernacle is made of 4 different material types: leather, wood, metal, and fabric. And it's a matter of how you arrange that fabric. Traditionally, they show it looking very much like a shoebox or a shipping container. Kind of sometimes they'll make it A-frame shape with a roof slope, but usually it looks like almost like an RV or something like that on wheels, or minus the wheels. And I basically have gone to prove that again, not only is the courtyard circular, but the whole rest of the structure, it's being laid out circular. And I guess with it being dome-shaped, again, there's a lot of advantages to dome-shaped structures. Again, I'm a mechanical engineer. That's part of my background and schooling and everything like that. So when I started into this, I put my engineer's hat on and said, well, what do we have here? What makes sense? And then you look at all the ancient precedents too for building and everything. So yeah, it's quite a paradigm shift over what is traditional. But you start studying the traditional models, the shoebox models I call them, and you'll find that none of them match. Everyone's got different opinions and divergent thinking and little pieces and parts, and the only thing they can seem to agree on is a rectangle shape. So that's how it is. Are you hearing any clicking still, or is that all better? Or?
It seems to be better. So I'm not sure what it is, but I thought, I definitely wanted to bring it to your attention.
Okay.
Yeah, so we could, if there is a issue, we could remedy that. But as far as the last thing, it seems like, and I believe this is one of the premises that helps you to come to discernment with regard to your model, is that you are utilizing only what is found there within Scripture, whereas the other individuals and the other models, they are having to add to in order to, I guess, keep structural integrity for the rectangular shape. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's one of the strongest arguments in case in point. If you want to talk about real ones that they've erected for models, there's, as far as I can tell, about a half a dozen life-size models here in the U.S., and there's been a couple in Israel. I toured Israel, and when I say the framework of the one in Timna, actually, my understanding is that came out of Germany a number of years ago. So it's kind of ironic, coming out of Germany. But German engineering, they like to make things stout. Well, they happen to use galvanized strut. I want to say it's about 2 or 3 inch square sections, just to keep the side panels held up. They put anchors in the ground, many feet deep, to keep the thing from blowing over, blowing apart, etc. So, what you have in these sort of theme park models, it's just more fiction, or they're thrown at you because they cannot get the thing to stand up, kind of under its own weight and power if they build it according to how they translate it. And again, you're going to have problems in the King James world or whatever English translation you use, because they're all kind of daughters of King James, and they've all got these preconceived notion of the wrong sheet arrangement and the rectangular arrangement right when they go into it. So nothing good can become of it after you turn left at Toledo and you should have taken a right.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell us really quickly also about the book that you've been working on, and as well as the images, and then where people can go to find your work. As far as do you have it released yet, or is it going to be released on Project 314, or where can they go to see this?
Yeah, the book, I'm likely to title it The House of El Shaddai, and I'm calling it that. Part of it, if you look at Shaddai, the Hebrew spelling for Shaddai is a Shin, Dalet, and Yud. Shin in Gematria is 300, Dalet is 4, and Yud is 10, so you add that all together. So you literally have the idea of the house, El Shaddai. It's literally, he's the God of pie, he's the God of the house, and getting into the idea of everlasting. A circle is the only thing, Ein Sof, without end. No beginning, no ending. That is a circle. That is, again, part of the nature and character of God. So that's likely title. I guess I'm still kicking around possibilities yet, but I've just completed the draft. Now this work is focused on basically trying to reboot people's minds, away from the shoebox, and make them aware of, all the arguments in favor of the round one. And it's more than just, the curtains math adds up to 314. For a couple of years now, actually, I've had drawings on the website for sale. And that's basically a 4-page bilingual, I guess I call them engineering exegesis drawings, because they go through verse by verse and say, well, this is what this ought to be translated as, or this is literally what the Hebrew is pointing to, and I go through that again verse by verse, and you take a number of drawings within each drawing sheet to define that. But so right now that's a finished product. The book. I'm debating whether I'll do the pre-release orders yet. I'm still kicking that around, but the book itself is it's all drafted. I need some editing on it, and other than that, I have all the graphics kind of set in, and just been cranking copies out on the laser, and I'm really I'm about to send the first one to get a test binding and to see how it makes sure it lays out right, prints right in the other format. So I'm very close to having this thing out, but I'm reluctant to put the firm date. But again, that's what its purpose is and the content, and that's what it's all about there. So.
Okay, last thing, as far as are you not also putting together something as far as visual, or a model, like a life-size even, a model of this, and maybe a video presentation of you putting it together piece by piece? Is that something that's also in the works?
Yeah, over the course of the last couple of years, I did make a proof of concept frame. I had another, dare I say, fellow engineer, supporting that, materials and all, and altogether I set it up over the course of this last summer, but I guess started building that in it was fall of 2016, late fall, early winter, whatever, and basically the structure that I've fabbed up is 22 feet in diameter, thereabouts, and got it standing last summer, minus the leather covering, and I do have some video of that as far as taking clips along the way, but getting all the editing in there. I'm a one-man, kind of a one-man show in a lot of ways, and as they say, sounding like I'm like the sound of one hand clapping. You don't hear much because there's not another alongside to to counter the all the motions that I'm throwing forth. So I'm I've got a big appetite as far as where I want to go with the projects, all the things I want to accomplish. But again, funding has been very short, and my attention to getting into the promotional side, I just haven't directed a lot of energy in towards that because of I've seen some other things where I've had opportunities. I see them as being mission critical things, and I do them. Like the building of the thing. That's a proof of concept is, I think, a very important thing to demonstrate. Yeah, this is more than just my crazy imagination. This is the literal verse by verse representation of what's going on here. Granted, it being scaled down substantially, but because 22 feet diameter, this thing was much, much larger than in real life. So,
wow. All right, very cool, brother. Well, I'm looking forward to the further discourse tomorrow. And if anybody has any questions that you'd like for me to present to Andy tomorrow during the broadcast, you can hit me up at Facebook or email zengarcia2010@gmail.com. Last thing, the significance. What do you think the significance with regard to your work and bringing forth this truth is for, just basic, understanding the Torah, because I do believe that you said the description of the tabernacle, that there's much information on it, and just bringing that to truth. But what other aspects as far as the significance of this for world?
Well, the prophetic side, I guess, is subject to debate. There's some people who believe that a tent will be set up, last days type thing. You have the possibility of, say, 400 years. The first one was created around 1440 BC, and actually remained in Israel to about 1000 BC or so. They say it was in Shiloh 369 years. And so I guess, one question, one idea is, okay, if you've got a millennial kingdom entry, is it possible that the tabernacle would precede the temple? Is it tied into a bigger Exodus picture? What's the significance of it? I find it interesting that, they rebuild the Ark, and not Ark of the Covenant. I'm talking about Noah's Ark. Was it in Kentucky or Carolinas? They have, they spent $100 million on an ark that won't float for a flood that won't happen. So this is a case where, like, this is the house of God that was never rescinded. It was like, yes, it was, whether it fell to enemies or was destroyed is subject to debate, and I'm not going to, go on a big stance there, but. With this, I literally call it a rediscovery. I mean, this is, my opinion, apart from debatably the Dead Sea Scrolls, I think this is the biggest Bible discovery in thousands of years. And, they, going back to the time of Josephus, they had it kind of botched up. So it was altered, between that time. But, in exile, the Jews that came back from the Babylonian exile, half of them didn't even speak Hebrew anymore. Mm-hmm. And so everyone thinks that, okay, the Jews have been, tied into this pattern, and dialed in. No, I'm sorry. In exile, they lost a lot. And as far as, restoring this idea, part of, I think, above it, if this thing never goes anything beyond academic, well, I hope it serves as a wake-up call for people who are in, the establishments getting fed status quo all the time, and the status quo within the establishments takes another look back and say, hey, what what are we really clinging to? I like the idea of seeing more people go back to Hebrew as as a source of knowledge, and you can't learn if you don't look. You can't figure anything out if you're not willing to study and consider something outside of your English doctrinally driven paradigms. And that to me is one of the most exciting things about this. This is a reason for pause for everybody in just about every religious circle there is. Even outside Judeo-Christian traditions, I see certain parallels that are just eerie, striking similarities and things like that you can't see in these other things. So it's a historical link, it's a cultural link, it's a I don't want to sound like a religious pluralist, but getting back into this undoing of that what's been done at Babel, that where everyone united together in what, a bad building project, right? So this is, literally, this is going back to an original Hebrew building project with, precedents. And again, I got proof of concept and detailed exegesis. Again, they can look that up on my website. I don't have it all published, but I have enough on the website to get anyone who's serious about studying this started. And then on as far as what I have for the drawings right now, the drawings again are my only product, and I've been running in the red for quite a while on this thing, and so I, on one hand, I guess I mixed emotions about how I'm disclosing and what I'm disclosing, but if there's no public demand to go beyond the courtyard, then that's all people are going to see is the outside of the courtyard, and if there's no appetite. So again, in my book, I really it's 200 pages, and there's, I think I counted earlier today, it was like 230 illustrations and pictures, illustrations, diagrams, etc. So it's a thorough, 2 chapters of the Bible, going through just, in my opinion, it's immaculate detail, and this explanation fits, and theirs doesn't, and I can prove it. And so this is proof being ready in the marketplace, and I guess whether or not the establishments will have any tolerance of it, I guess, remains to be seen. I've had mixed responses from showing individuals, but people have a hard time thinking of the tabernacle as being significant, and that's what I'm also very much trying to change people's minds on. So
Well, the other aspect that's important with regard to my work is the cosmological aspects, which that's something we'll go into some other time. But hey, brother, we do appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening. Andy Hoy will be my guest tomorrow night on Truth Frequency Radio from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern, and so please do join us there.
All right. Thanks,
All right,
Ed.
man. Appreciate you. Be blessed.
All right. Talk to you tomorrow.
All right. Good night, brother. All right. We're going to pick up. Oh, I did have some very interesting news with regard to the Babel and the confusion of the languages and all of that happened there. I spoke with Chris Adams earlier today, and those that don't know, he is a Paleo Hebrew script language expert, has been studying this for a very long time, and he's going to be joining me on a regular basis, and we're going to be speaking about the Paleo Hebrew script, and he's going to be teaching myself as well as you as the listening audience, and walking us through how to better understand the Paleo Hebrew language, each one of the glyphs, and how they come together to form words. And so I'm really looking forward to that. We're going to probably begin our first show within 3 weeks' time. And so I think a lot of you are very interested in Hebrew, as I am myself, that you probably just don't have the time to study and examine it in very thorough manner, as is my own difficulty. And so this will be a way for us to learn together in fellowship with one another, with one of the best minds out there with regard to this information. And so I'm looking forward to that as well. And then also next week, I will be picking up with Bill McGregor to finish the whole tuning fork series. And then all of that will be coming out soon in video format as well. So, and I'll be releasing that in video format on our YouTube channel, Endeavor Freedom and Zen Garcia. And so this evening is a follow-up on the Enochian parable, on the basically the what I call the animal farm parable, on the fullness of the story of Israel and the enmity between the seed of promise and the seed of perdition. And in last week's show, I read and covered in great detail the parable, the dream vision, which is found beginning in chapter 85, I believe it is, of the book of Enoch, where Enoch relates to his son Methuselah the story of the the fullness of the story of Israel as it was related to him in dream vision. And for those that have never read or do not know about what I'm talking about, the story is so very detailed. It's precise in nature with regard to the history and the prophecies that were passed down and handed from Adam to his children, and that made it as part of the work of Enoch, and that was relayed to Noah, and that traveled through onto the ark, and that was passed down to Shem and to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob and to Joseph and the other patriarchs of the 12 tribes. And so, and this is a major part of the premise that I put forth in this new book that I'm working on, the ancient prophecies of Christ, and how it is that these prophetic utterances were treasured by the various patriarchs and the prophets, and that having been written down, they were stored up and gathered in the cave of treasures and then revealed to the magi of Seth's line. And then once it was revealed and brought to light post-flood and during the time and life of Christ, it was then that these works, these testimonies, as I've compiled in one of my newest books, the Testaments of the Patriarchs and the Prophets, that this body of work not only confirmed in prophecy the first coming of Christ, as it is also connected to the Leviticus 23, the feast days, the spring feast, and also the summer feast, but also connected to the second coming of Christ and harvest at the end of days, where the harvest would be gleaned, the children of perdition gathered as the tares for burning, and the wheat as the seed of promise, gathered for preservation, which in all of the various stories, even that which we will be elaborating and finishing this evening with regard to Enoch's dream vision, all of these prophecies contain and speak about the what is the climax of all of the history of the world and that of humanity. And that is the second advent and the harvest and the judgment. And it is that harvest and judgment where every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that determines who will be numbered amongst the elect and who would be worthy of entrance into New Jerusalem. And you know, whether New Jerusalem is in pyramidal shape or that of a dome, or you know, whatever shape it may be, I do believe it will reflect the cosmology, and that the Mount of the Congregation reflects the three tiers, the three heavens, as it is laid out and as it is conceptualized in not only the Noah's Ark, but also the wilderness tabernacle, and also uh, in three segments, the Solomon's temple, as I revealed in my ninth book, The Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch, in one of the chapters therein. But anyway, so we're going to go ahead and get into the dream vision here. And I'm going to retrace just a little bit. I'm going to go back to Esau and Jacob and the differentiation there, how it relates to even what is spoken about at the very beginning in the garden parable, with the differentiation, the distinction between um, Cain and Abel. How Cain is described as the black cow, Abel is described as the red bull. I mean bull, excuse me. The black bull, the red bull, and then Seth, who was born as replacement, substitution, or compensation for that of his brother Abel, who was murdered by Cain, which is the reason why I believe Abel is cited as being the red bull, that he was the blood sacrifice and the first casualty in this war, in the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. In the Targum version of Genesis chapter 3, in verse 15, it says that to the serpent, the Most High Yahuwah Elohim, he says, I will put enmity between thy seed and her seed, between thy son and her sons. And, you know, in my opinion, the particulars is that we know that Satan, that Cain is his progeny, and that the reason it says thy son is because he was the progenitor for the seed of the serpent and that entire bloodline, that entire lineage. And even though Lucifer is cited as in Isaiah 14 as being the abominable branch, and that his children are named the seed of the evildoers, it's because Abel was murdered by his half brother Cain that the Targum is specific in citing that there would be enmity between thy seed and her seed, between thy son and her sons, plural. And in my opinion, that is prophetic because it also shows to you that that enmity cited in Genesis chapter 3:15 is specific to the birth of Cain and Abel and the murder of Abel, and then his replacement by that of Sheth. And Sheth is cited in this dream vision, this parable, as being in his mother Eve and his father Adam's likeness, and he is cited as, like they are, as being a white bull. And so here, and we're going to pick it up here with Jacob and Esau, we see that they are also spoken of in similar terms, that Jacob is cited as being the white bull and Esau as the black bull. And I did have somebody commented, said that he believed that the colors are associated to actual skin tones, but in my opinion, that's incorrect, and that the Adamites, even the children of Cain, that there were no darker peoples with regard to Adam's line until after the flood, and beginning with the children of Ham and his generations, and the Canaanites. And the reason they were darker is because they relocated in Egypt, in Mizraim, and those places which are nearer to the equator and where they would receive more sunlight. And because of that, over time and through the generations, they took on darker skin tone. And that even the Shemites, who are called and considered to be the red men, they are olive skin in color, but not quite as dark. And then the Japhets and those that relocated to the extreme northern or extreme southern climates, because these were colder climates, and because they lived indoors and did not were not outside a lot, they are lighter skin color and also have lighter eye and hair color as well, in my opinion. And so, and I'll go into this and at some other point, because a lot of people keep asking me with my opinion on the colors of the people and the different races and how they came about. And that's something that I don't go into in great detail. I think it causes division, but I will share, some passages. And again, my whole opinion on that has not to do with any particular curses or anything of that nature, but that it has more to do with climate and environment, and also to how much sun people received according to the different places they located here upon the face of the earth. And because the sun travels back and forth between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, that in the progression of its movement back and forth between these two extremes, that those people that live near the equatorial regions, that they would receive more sunshine and a predominance of sunlight, so that it would affect in my opinion, their melanin and their skin tone over generations. And so that's just my opinion. Okay, picking it up here in, let's see, this is chapter 88, verse 18. It says, "And they began to bite each other when the white cow, which was born in the midst of them, brought forth a wild ass and a white cow at the same time. And after that, many wild asses. Then the white cow which was born brought forth a black wild sow and a white sheep. And that wild sow also brought forth many swine, and the sheep brought forth 12 sheep, the 12 patriarchs. When those 12 sheep grew up, they delivered one of them to the asses." We know that's the story of Joseph. "Again, those asses delivered that sheep to the wolves, the Egyptians, and he grew up in the midst of them. Then the Lord brought the 11 other sheep that they might dwell and feed with him in the midst of the wolves. They multiplied, and there was abundance of pasture for them. But the wolves began to frighten and oppress them, while they destroyed their young ones. And they left their young in torrents of deep water. Now the sheep began to cry out on account of their young, and fled for refuge to their Lord. One, however, which was saved, escaped and went to the wild asses." And so, those of you that are familiar with scripture, you'll recognize that as the story of Joseph and how it was during his time that he became second in command under Pharaoh, and that he was responsible for gathering and controlling the harvest over the 7 years of plenty. And it did so in order to prepare the world for the 7 years of famine, which was the interpretation of the vision, the dream that Pharaoh had, and which Joseph was released from the bondage of the slave pits, the slave mines, in order to interpret this dream. And in doing so, uh, he was then granted charge and put second in command over Egypt. And it was during his administration that the Hebrew people were greatly loved and greatly revered and respected, but that um, after he had passed away and after Pharaoh had passed away, that when his son came to power, they began to oppress the Israelites, and they sought to reduce them in population, which is why their firstborn, their male children, were thrown into the waters and drowned, which, for those that don't know the connection, that is why the Most High brought on them the death by Red Sea, where he drowned them in the Red Sea and parting the waves in order to provide safe passage for Israel. But because they had done this abominable thing in drowning the children of the Israelites, that was justice, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And justice was brought on them in similar manner. All right, continuing. And that was when Moses was 430 years later, after the bondage, their bondage for 4 centuries, 4 generations in Egypt, as was revealed to Ezekiel and others. And speaking about this same bondage, Abraham was also given prophecy of this same thing, that Moshe was raised up, and he and his brother were to lead the Israelites in Exodus to their freedom. And it would be at that time that the promise that was given to Abraham, that his descendants would inherit the land that they had seen, the promised land in Canaan, which is modern day Israel, that all of that would come about. And so we know Joshua was the one that led them into the land, and that they took their inheritance back from the Canaanites, who had usurped them from their from Shem, their uncle Shem. All right, continuing. I beheld the sheep moaning, crying, and petitioning their Lord with all their might, until the Lord of the sheep descended at their voice from his lofty habitation, went to them and inspected them. He called to that sheep which had secretly stolen away from the wolves, and told him to make the wolves understand that they were not to touch the sheep. Then that sheep went to the wolves with the word of the Lord, when another met him and proceeded with him. That's his brother Aaron. Both of them together entered the dwelling of the wolves, and covering them, made them understand that henceforth they were not to touch the sheep. Afterwards I perceived the wolves greatly prevailing over the sheep with their whole force. The sheep cried out, and their Lord came to them. He began to strike the wolves, who commenced a grievous lamentation. But the sheep were silent, not from the time did they cry out. I then looked at them until they departed from the wolves. The eyes of the wolves were blind, who went out and followed them with all their might. But the Lord of the sheep proceeded with them and conducted them. All his sheep followed him. His countenance was terrific and splendid, and glorious was his aspect. Yet the wolves began to follow the sheep until they overtook them in a certain lake of water, the Reed Sea, or the Red Sea. Then that lake became divided, the water standing up on both sides before their face. And while their Lord was conducting them, he placed himself between them and the wolves. The wolves, however, perceived not the sheep, but went into the midst of the lake, following them and running after them into the lake of water. But when they saw the Lord of the sheep, they turned to fly from before his face. Then the water of the lake returned, and then suddenly, according to its nature, it became full and was raised up until it covered the wolves. And I saw that all of them which had followed the sheep perished and were drowned. But the sheep passed over the water, proceeding to a wilderness which was without both water and grass. And they began to open their eyes and to see. Then I beheld the Lord of the sheep, inspecting them and giving them water and grass. The sheep already mentioned was proceeding with them and conducting them. And when he had ascended to the top of the lofty rock, the Lord of the sheep sent him to them. Afterwards I perceived the Lord standing before them with an aspect terrific, and severe. And when they all beheld him, they were frightened at his countenance. All of them were alarmed and trembled. They cried out after that sheep and to the other sheep who had been with him and who was in the midst of them, saying, We are not able to stand before our Lord or to look upon him. Then that sheep who conducted them went away and ascended to the top of the rocks. When the rest of the sheep began to grow blind and to wander from the path which he had shown them, but he knew it not. Their Lord, however, was moved with great indignation against them, and when that sheep had learned what had happened, he had descended from the top of the rock, and coming to them, found that there were many which had become blind and had wandered from his path. As soon as they beheld him, they feared and trembled at his presence, and became desirous of returning to their fold. Then that sheep, taking With him, other sheep went to those which had wandered, and afterwards began to kill them. They were terrified at his countenance. Then he caused those which had wandered to return, who went back to their fold. Likewise, I likewise saw there in the vision that this sheep became a man, built a house for the Lord of the sheep, and made them all stand in the house. That's the tabernacle, the wilderness tabernacle. I perceived also that the sheep which proceeded to meet the sheep, their conductor died. I saw too that all the great sheep perished, while smaller ones rose up in their place, entered into a pasture, and approached a river of water. Then that sheep, their conductor, who became a man, was separated from them and died. All the sheep sought after him, cried for him with bitter lamentation. I saw likewise that they ceased to cry after that sheep and passed over the river of water, and that there arose other sheep, all of whom conducted them, instead of those who were dead and who had previously conducted them. Then I saw that the sheep entered into a goodly place, and a territory delectable and glorious. I saw also that they became satiated, that their house was in the midst of the delectable territory, and that sometimes their eyes were open, and that sometimes they were blind. Until another sheep arose and conducted them. He brought them all back, and their eyes were open. This is Samuel. Then dogs, foxes, and wild boars began to devour them, until again another sheep arose, the master of the flock, one of themselves, a man to conduct them. This ram began to butt on every side those dogs, foxes, and wild boars until they all perished. This is Saul. His eyes and saw the ram in the midst of them who had laid aside his glory. Then he began to strike the sheep, treading upon them, and behaving himself without dignity. Then their Lord sent the former sheep again to a still different sheep, and raised him up to be a ram and to conduct them instead of that sheep who had laid aside his glory. This is David. Going therefore to him and conversing with him alone, he raised up that ram and made him a prince and a leader of the flock, all the time that the dogs troubled the sheep, the Philistines. The first ram paid respect to this latter ram. Then the latter ram arose and fled away from before his face, and I saw that those dogs caused the first ram to fail. But the latter ram arose and conducted the smaller sheep. The ram likewise began many sheep and died. Then there were smaller sheep, a ram instead of him, which became a prince and leader conducting the flock. This is Solomon. And the sheep increased in size and multiplied. And all the dogs, foxes, and wild boars feared and fled away from him. The ram also struck and killed all the wild beasts, so that they could not again prevail in the midst of the sheep, nor at any time ever snatch them away. And that house was made large and wide, a lofty tower being built upon it by the sheep for the Lord of the sheep. The house was low, but the tower was elevated and very high. Then the Lord of the sheep stood upon that tower and caused a full table to approach before him. Again, I saw that those sheep wandered and went various ways, forsaking their house. And that the Lord... All right, we'll be right back.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
All right, welcome back, everybody. That hour went by so very fast. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get into this so I can make sure to make it through the fullness of this text. And then, if time allows, I have one more section that I'd like to share from Second Enoch, which I think is also very relevant to this time, this day and age, with our being at the end of days, in my opinion, with regard to our being the fig tree generation, that generation which would be those alive who would see in the fullness of prophecy everything coming to light in the manner that it was all written down and scripted. All right, so continuing. Again, I saw that those sheep wandered and went various ways, forsaking their house, and that their Lord called to some among them whom he sent to them, the prophets. But these the sheep began to kill, and when one of them was saved from slaughter, Elijah, he leaped and cried out against those who were desirous of killing him. But the Lord of the sheep delivered him from their hands and made him ascend to him and remained with him. He sent also many others to them to testify with lamentations to exclaim against them. Again, I saw when some of them forsook the house of their Lord and his tower, wandering on all sides and growing blind. I saw that the Lord of the sheep made a great slaughter among them in their pasture until they cried out to him in consequence of that slaughter. Then he departed from the place of his habitation and left them in the power of lions, tigers, wolves, and the Zebet hyenas. Zebet is hyenas. And in the power of the foxes and of every beast. And the wild beasts began to tear them. I saw too that he forsook the house of their fathers and their tower, giving them all into the power of the lions, to tear and devour them into the power of every beast. Then I began to cry out with all my might, imploring the Lord of the sheep, and showing him how the sheep were devoured by all the beasts of prey. But he looked on in silence, rejoicing that they were devoured, swallowed up, and carried off, and leaving them in the power of every beast for food. He called also 70 shepherds and resigned to them the care of the sheep, that they might overlook them, saving to them and to their associates, every one of you henceforth overlook the sheep, and whatsoever I command you, do, and I will deliver them to you numbered. I will tell you which of them shall be slain. These destroy. And he delivered the sheep to them. Then he called to another and said, understand and watch everything which the shepherds shall do to these sheep, for many more of them shall perish than I have commanded. Of every excess and slaughter which the shepherds shall commit, there shall be an account, as how many have perished by my command, and how many they may have destroyed of their own heads. Of all the destruction brought about by each of the shepherds, there shall be an account, and according to the number I will cause a recital to be made before me, how many they have destroyed of their own heads, and how many they have delivered up to destruction, that I may have this testimony against them, that I may know all their proceedings, and that delivering the sheep to them, I may see what they will do, whether they will act as I have commanded them or not. Of this, however, they shall be ignorant, neither shall you make any explanation to them, neither shall you reprove them, but there shall be an account of all the destruction done by them in their respective seasons. Then they began to kill and destroy more than it was commanded them. And they left the sheep in the power of the lions, so that very many of them were devoured and swallowed up by lions and tigers, and wild boars preyed upon them. That tower they burnt and overthrew that house. Then I grieved extremely on account of the tower, and because the house of the sheep was overthrown. Neither was I afterwards able to perceive whether they again entered that house. The shepherds likewise and their associates delivered them to all the wild beasts, that they might devour them, each of them in his season, according to his number, was delivered up, each of them, one with another, was described in a book. How many of them, one with another, were destroyed in a book. This is the temple all being destroyed during Nebuchadnezzar's time. More, however, than was ordered, every shepherd killed and destroyed. Then I began to weep and was greatly indignant on account of the sheep. In like manner also I saw in the vision him who wrote, how he wrote down one destroyed by the shepherds every day. He ascended, remained, and exhibited each of his books to the Lord of the sheep, containing all which they had done, and all which each of them had made away with, and all which they had delivered up to destruction. He took the book up in his hands, read it, sealed it, and deposited it. After this I saw shepherds overlooking for 12 hours. And behold, 3 of the sheep departed, arrived, went in, and began building all which was fallen down of that house. This is Zerubbabel, Joshua, and Nehemiah, who were commissioned by Cyrus to go forth and to rebuild. But the wild boars hindered them, although they prevailed not. This is the Samaritans. Again, they began to build as before and raised up that tower, which was called a lofty tower. And again, they began to place before the tower a table with every impure and unclean kind of bread upon it. Moreover, also all the sheep were blind and could not see, as were the shepherds. Thus were they delivered up to the shepherds for a great destruction, who trod them underfoot and devoured them. Yet was their Lord silent until all the sheep in the field were destroyed. The shepherds and the sheep were all mixed together, but they did not save them from the power of the beast. Then he who wrote the book ascended, exhibited it, and read it at the residence of the Lord of the sheep. He petitioned him for them and prayed, pointing out every act of these shepherds and testifying before him against them all. Then, taking the book, he deposited it with him and departed. Really quickly, I want to tell you an interesting story that is connected to this and that people might be interested in reading. It has to do with a text called the how do you say it? Paraphilomia Jeremiah, I believe it is what it's called. Anyways, it's a story. It's a time travel story. It's a fascinating tale. It covers that Jeremiah, because he was the high priest during this time. Daniel was a scribe, as was Baruch was also a scribe, and Baruch and Daniel. Jeremiah was the high priest. But anyways, it tells the story of how one of the helpers, one of Jeremiah's helpers, he did not want him to have to see the destruction of Jerusalem or to see the oppression of the people. And so Jeremiah sent him into the wilderness to gather some figs. And while he did so, he fell asleep. And when he came back to deliver the figs, he didn't recognize um, the city or the people. And he asked them about Jeremiah and where Jeremiah was, and that's when he was told the story of how Jeremiah was taken into exile. I believe it was 70 years earlier. It was almost because it was 70 years for 70 years that they would be held in the bondage of Babylon before they would be allowed to return. And even Jeremiah the high priest would be allowed to return and see the temple rebuilt and the people reestablished to the Holy Land. And so in this particular tale, he implores the people tell him, where Jeremiah is, and he believes them all to be crazy because basically, he's like, well, I just saw him yesterday, and then it ended up being like almost 70 years that he had seen them, and in the meantime, he thought that everybody he was talking to, that they were all crazy. And so this is a time travel story, which you can find in the extra biblical materials. When I publish this show, I'll link in the description this particular story that I'm talking about, because I know I'm probably not. I didn't call it exactly what it was. All right, continuing. But it is a fascinating story. It shows you how the Most High has power and authority over time and space, and that he can send forth, if he wants, people into the future or into the past, however he wishes. And that these kind of things are biblical, as far as the story of time travel and that kind of manner. All right, continue. And I observed during the time that this 37 shepherds were overlooking, all of whom finished in their respective periods as the first. Others then received them into their hands that they might overlook them in their respective periods. Every shepherd in his own period, 37, and apparent error from 35, according to R.H. Charles, the kings of Judah and that of Israel. Afterwards I saw in the vision that all the birds of heaven arrived, eagles, the ibis, kites, and ravens. The eagle instructed them all. They began to devour the sheep, to peck out their eyes, and to eat up their bodies. The sheep then cried out, for their bodies were devoured by the birds. I also cried out and groaned in my sleep against the shepherds which overtook the flock. And I looked while the sheep were eaten up by the dogs, by the eagles, and by the kites. They neither left them their body, nor their skin, nor their muscles, until their bones alone remained, until their bones fell upon the ground, and the sheep became diminished. I observed likewise during the time that 23 shepherds were overlooking, who completed in their respective periods 58 periods, the kings of Babylon, etc., during and after the captivity. The numbers 35 and 23 make 58 and not 37, as erroneously put in the first verse, says R.H. Lawrence. Then were small lambs born of those white sheep, who began to open their eyes and to see, crying out to the sheep. The sheep, however, cried not out to them, neither did they hear what they uttered to them, but were deaf, blind, and obdurate in their greatest degrees. I saw in the vision that ravens flew down upon those lambs, that they seized one of them, and that tearing the sheep in pieces, they devoured them. I saw also that the horns grew upon those lambs, and that the ravens lighted down upon their horns. I saw too that a large horn sprouted out of an animal among the sheep, and that their eyes were open. He looked at them, their eyes were wide open, and he cried out to them. Then the Bella, the ibex, saw him, all of whom ran to him. This ibex, Lawrence says, represents Alexander the Great. And besides this, all the eagles, the aves, the ravens, and the kites were all still carrying off the sheep, flying down upon them and devouring them. The sheep were silent, but the Debella lamented and cried out. Then the ravens contended and struggled with them. They wished among them to break his horn, but they prevailed not over him. I looked on them until the shepherds, the eagles, the aves, and the kites came. Now, for those that are familiar with the biblical narrative, you will recognize this period as being that which is connected to the time of the Maccabees, um, and also to the stories of the Maccabean Wars, which we have compiled in great detail for those that want to know and study about this particular era and how it was that during Antiochus Epiphanes and the rule of um, Greece over that of Israel, and how there was contention between them so many times that they were taken over, and Judas Maccabeus and his brother Jonathan and others came to rule and um, to lead the rebellion against what was the um, I guess the Grecian and the paganization of Israel. And so it was during this time that all the Maccabean Wars, and they were trying to get the even the high priest Eleazar and his 7 sons and his wife Salomonia, tried to get them to eat food sacrificed unto idols. And it was during this time that Antiochus Epiphanes also had the lion men of Moab uh, working as, like the special forces for him. And they were the ones that, excuse me, in the story of Maccabees number 4, fourth Maccabees, it was they who were doing the torture of the 7 children of the Rabbi Eleazar, the high priest who was killed and murdered by them, and then his 7 sons, one after the other. And it was his mother, their mother, Salomonia, who was encouraging them to remain strong to their faith. And those stories are deeply moving. I probably the first 5, 6, 7 times that I read them, I would just cry um, because of the torment and the terror that they underwent, and the kind of persecution that they had to face, and yet they remained true to their faith and to their God, and just how powerful those stories are. But anyways, we did release all of them in a book called uh, the apocryphal text of the Maccabean Wars, And in the R version, most of there's usually four pseudepigraphal texts associated to the Maccabees, 1 through 4. Three of them, I believe, are found in the apocryphal books that were removed from the original 80 books of the King James Version of the canon. Whereas in our, our compilation, we have 8 books, um, 8 text manuscripts associated to the Maccabean wars and to that particular time period. And so it explains it in great detail, in so much detail that it'll help you to understand all of this time and this that I'm talking and relating about now. All right, continuing. I perceived likewise that the Lord of the sheep came to them in wrath, while all those who saw him fled away and fell down in the tabernacle before his face, while all the eagles, aves, ravens, and kites assembled and brought with them all the sheep of the field. All came together and strove to break the horn of the Dibella. Then I saw that the man who wrote the book at the word of the Lord opened the book of destruction, of that destruction which the last 12 shepherds wrought and pointed out before the Lord of the sheep. And they destroyed more than those who preceded them. This is native princes of Judah after its delivery from the Syrian yoke, according to Lawrence. I saw also that the Lord of the sheep came to them, and taking in his hand the scepter of his wrath, seized the earth, which became rent asunder, while all the beasts and the birds of heaven fell from the sheep and sunk into the earth, which closed over them. I saw too that a large sword was given to the sheep, who went forth against all the beasts of the field to slay them. But all the beasts and birds of heaven fled away from before their face. And I saw a throne erected in a delectable land. Upon this sat the Lord of the sheep, who received all the sealed books which were opened before him. Then the Lord called the first 7 white ones and commanded them to bring before him the first of the first stars, which preceded the stars, whom form partly resembled that of horses. The first star which fell down first, and they brought them all before them. And he spoke to the man who wrote in his presence, who was one of the 7 white ones, saying, Take those 70 shepherds to whom I delivered up the sheep, and who, receiving them, killed more of them than I commanded. Behold, I saw them all bound and standing before him. First came on the trial of the stars, which being judged and found guilty, went to the place of punishment. They thrust them into a place deep and full of flaming fire and full of pillars of fire. Then the 70 shepherds were judged, and being found guilty were thrust into the flaming abyss. At that time likewise I perceived that one abyss was thus opened in the midst of the earth, which was full of fire. And to this were brought the blind sheep, which being judged and found guilty were all thrust into that abyss of fire on the earth and burnt. The abyss was on the right of that house. And I saw the sheep burning and their bones consuming. I stood beholding him immersed that ancient house, while they brought on out of its pillars every plant in it, and the ivory enfolding it. They brought it out and deported it in a place on the right side of the earth. I also saw that the Lord of the sheep produced a new house, great and loftier than the former, which he bound by the former circular spot. All its pillars were new, and its ivory new, as well as more abundant than the former ancient ivory which he had brought out. And while all the sheep which were left were in the midst of it, all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of heaven fell down and worshipped them, petitioning them and obeying them in everything. Then those 3 who were clothed in white, and who, holding me by my hand, had before caused me to ascend, while the hand of him who spoke held me, raised me up, and placed me in the midst of the sheep before the judgment took place. The sheep were all white with wool, long and purer than all who had perished and had been destroyed. Every beast of the field and every bird of heaven assembled in that house, while the Lord of the sheep rejoiced with great joy because all were good and had come back again to his dwelling. And I saw that they laid down the sword which had been given to the sheep and returned it to his house, sealing it up in the presence of the Lord. All the sheep would have been enclosed in the house had it been capable of containing them. And the eyes of all were open, gazing on the good one. For not was there one among them who did not behold him. I likewise perceived that the house was large, wide, and extremely full. I saw too that a white cow was born whose horns were great, and that all the beasts of the field and all the birds of heaven were alarmed at him, and entreated him at all times. Then I saw that the nature of all them was changed, and that they became white cows, and that the first who was in the midst of them spoke when that word became a large beast, upon the head of which were great and black horns. While the Lord of the sheep rejoiced over them and over all the cows, I lay down in the midst of them. I awoke and saw the whole. This is the vision which I saw, lying down and waking. Then I blessed the Lord of righteousness and gave glory to him. Afterwards I wept abundantly, nor did my tears cease, so that I became incapable of enduring it. While I was looking on, they flowed on account of what I saw, for all was come and gone by every individual circumstance respecting the conduct of mankind was seen by me. In that night I remembered my former dream, and therefore wept and was troubled, because I had seen that vision. Now, I'm not sure if I somehow had skipped over something, because it seems to me that it skips over a certain portion. I'll have to check. And then went into the time of the end, with regard to New Jerusalem, to the second advent of Christ. And so I'll have to check. But anyways, in the meantime, I'm going to skip now to chapter 90, which is an explanation that Enoch gives. And then I'll touch upon that portion of second Enoch that I'd like to cover before we get to the end of the show. It says this: And now, my son, Methuselah, call to me all your brethren, and assemble for me all the children of your mother. For a voice calls me, and the Spirit is poured out upon me, that I may show you everything which shall happen to you forever. Then Methuselah went, called to him all his brethren, assembled his kindred, and conversing with all his children in truth, Enoch said, Hear, my children, every word of your father, and listen in uprightness to the voice of my mouth, for I would gain your attention while I address you. My beloved, be attracted to integrity and walk in it. Approach not integrity with a double heart, nor be associated with double-minded men, but walk, my children, in righteousness, which will conduct you in good paths, and be truth your companion. I want to make a comment here. Even when Adam was cast out of paradise, he was given the books of creation. One of those books of creation was the book of the generations of man. And in that book, it showed and talked about and revealed to Adam what all of his righteous seed from the time of Sheth, because it would be through Sheth that his bloodline, his progeny would be born, but that it would be through Sheth that he would see the unfolding of every generation and the specifics of what would happen to them. So he knew the end from the beginning already, just as the Most High has revealed it within the scripture. It was already contained and given to him in a book, and he knew exactly what was going to happen. And so, again, in my opinion, it's just further confirmation as to the prophetic nature of how everything from the time of Adam to the time of where we are now had already been specific and had already been foreknown, and had not to negate free will, because of course we all still have free will, and that is a component of life here in this world. But the Most High is so knowledgeable about even what we are to do with our free will that he is able to take into account that free will according to um, the grander scheme of what is the destiny and fate of humanity. And so, understanding and catering to all the aspects of the past, the present, and the future, and how they all come together, the Most High was able to reveal it in story. And that is the biblical narrative as written down by the prophets and the patriarchs. And that is the story of the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, as it has played out from the garden until now, even preceding with the war in heaven, and even in this day and age with what we are contending with regard to the New World Order. It all ties together in what is the most incredible story, tale of, I mean, you can't imagine or make up anything greater than what is the story of the generations of man. It's just incredible. All right, continuing. And once you know and better understand that, I mean, it is just mind blowing. Mind blowing what the true tale of, you know, the origins of humanity, the pre-Adamic age, the antediluvian times, uh, the rule of the Anunnaki, the seraphic angels, the dragons, and how they were here before us. Their enslavement of pre-Adamic man, the Most High creating modern humanity in their image in order to trump and to defeat the purposes of the rebel angels in enslaving pre-Adamic humanity. I mean, the story is incredible. All right, continuing. When therefore iniquity, sin, blasphemy, tyranny, and every evil work shall increase, and when transgression, impiety, and uncleanness also shall increase, then upon them all shall great punishment be inflicted from heaven. The Holy Lord shall go forth in wrath, and upon them all shall great punishment from heaven be afflicted. The Holy Lord shall go forth in wrath, and with punishment, that he may execute judgment upon earth. In those days oppression shall be cut off from its roots, and iniquity with fraud shall be eradicated, perishing from under heaven. Every place of strength shall be surrendered with its inhabitants. With fire shall it be burnt. They shall be brought forth from every part of the earth, and be cast into a judgment of fire. They shall perish in wrath, and by a judgment overpowering them forever. Every place of strength, all the idols of nations Righteousness shall be raised up from slumber, and wisdom shall be raised up and conferred upon them. Then shall the roots of iniquity be cut off, sinners perish by the sword, and blasphemers be annihilated everywhere. Those who meditate oppression and those who blaspheme by the sword shall perish. And now, my children, I will describe and point out to you the path of righteousness and the path of oppression. I want to also make a comment. I'm actually not going to be able to get to that portion of Second Enoch that I would like to cover because I want to have more time to cover it in the manner that I would like. But earlier in one of the comments, um, in one of the YouTube videos that recently I did on the high holy one of the most high of the high holy ones, an individual left a comment about how he had asked the Most High God to confirm for him whether my work was true or not. And so he said he randomly selected a passage from the scriptures to see whether it would confirm the whole premise of the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent that I have brought forth in postulation with the books that I do on the great contests and, the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, and also the the war in heaven and the separation of the forces of light and darkness, the good and evil. And he sent me a reply that, without question, the passage that he had randomly picked affirmed um, the whole premise of this concept as it plays out within the scriptures. And the passage that he said the Most High showed to him in order to confirm this teaching was Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 1. And so I'll read it to you. It says, "On that day they read in the book of Moses in the audience of the people, and therein was found written that the Ammonite and the Moabite should not come into the congregation of God forever." And if you don't understand what this passage is referencing, the Ammonite and the Moabite, they are part of the seed of the serpent. They were part of the Canaanites, the children of Ham, that, um, you know, the story of how the serpent seed survived the flood, that it was Ham mating with his mother, Noah's third wife or second wife, depending on what story you read. Nama, who was the sister of Tubal Cain, that she was the seed of the serpent and that she was the mother of Ham, and that mating with his own mother and bringing forth the child Canaan, that this was his seeing his father's nakedness. And in mating with Nama and bringing forth Canaan, it gave Canaan predominantly serpent seed genetics, over 51%. And so this is where the seed of the serpent continued in propagation after the flood. And it was through the Hamites that the contention between these two seed lines continued. Because it says in Matthew 13, let both grow together until the time of the end. And that it would be at the time of the end that the angels would be sent forth as reapers to gather the tares for burning and the wheat preservation. And so, of course, the war had to continue through the flood. And the Ammonite and the Moabite were part of the seed of the serpent post-flood. And so here, um, this passage is telling you that, yes, on that day they read in the book of Moses in the audience of the people, and therein was found written that the Ammonite and the Moabite should not come into the congregation of God forever. This is the same story as that we find in Matthew 13, where it says, and the tares shall be gathered together for burning. And this is the same story of Isaiah chapter 14, where Yahweh Elohim says, prepare slaughter for the children, the seed of the evildoers. I will not allow them to grow up or to gather or to inherit cities. The same destruction is brought forth and is confirmed here in Nehemiah chapter 13, which I thought that was pretty cool. All right, continuing in story here. And now, my children, I will describe and point out to you the path of righteousness and the path of oppression. I will again point them out to you that you may know what is to come. Hear now, my children, and walk in the path of righteousness, but shun that of oppression, for all who walk in the path of iniquity shall perish forever. Now, I'm going to end, that was chapter 90. I'm going to end there. And I want to bring forth one other thing really quickly. And it is from Matthew chapter 25, and it's the story of the goat and the tares, the goat and the sheep that I read at the very beginning of the show. And speaking about when the Son of Man shall come in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory, and before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divided his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Now, it's interesting when you look at the Greek words from some of these concepts. And I won't go through the whole thing because I don't have the time, but in looking at the various passages, it's so intriguing, especially with the right hand and the left hand, because we know that the right hand is always associated with the seed of the woman, and the left hand path with the synagogue of Satan, with the Luciferians, they call that the left hand path. And so, in looking at specifically what it is being referenced in the Greek, it says of the right hand, the word is dexios. And that particular word, it means a place of honor or authority. That's associated to the right hand. And the King James translates that word dexios 53 times in the following manner: 39 times as right hand, 12 times as right, and 2 times as right side. And as I said, the right hand, dexios, this Greek word dexios, it means the right hand, a place of honor or authority. It is also, this was interesting to me too, it is associated to the feminine and is the hand which usually takes or receives. And the other, the left hand, is the masculine and that which gives, and doesn't receive but gives or punishes, that kind of thing. And so I thought that was intriguing because it's the elect which will receive, whereas the Luciferian, the seed of the serpent, were through the divine right to rule, were the ones that oppressed and gave forth commandment and ruled with impunity and with the winds of their desires. And so that's intriguing. The left hand in the Greek is the word euonymos, And in this particular, the definitions for the left hand, it is translated 10 times in the King James, 5 times as left, 4 times as on the left hand, and 1 times as the left foot. And it means this in the biblical usage: of good name, of good omen, in the latter sense used in taking auguries, but those omens were euphemistically called eunomus, which in fact were regarded as unlucky, i.e., which came from the left, sinister omens, from which a good name was desired, the left or the left hand. And it was among the pagans that the left was considered to be lucky, but in the traditional sense and among the Hebrew, it was considered to be unlucky and sinister, tied to sinister omens. And so the Gentiles considered, or the pagans considered the left to be, the hand of privilege, the hand of rulership and authority, and the Hebrews believed the opposite, which I thought that was interesting. So in the sense of this particular story, this parable, we have the right being a place of honor, of meaning honor or authority, a place of honor or authority. And then on the left, we have the word meaning those that are unlucky, sinister, or unblessed, which that certainly seems to fit the whole, the whole distinction, the differentiation between the narrow way and the broad path which leads to destruction. And so that is the symbology. And then we have, of course, in the story of the differentiation between the place of the righteous and the place of the elect, which is paradise, and that of Sheol or perdition, or the place of the damned, Hades, Tartarus. That this is, the place where the children of perdition, where those that are cursed, which those that are damned, are held and confined in bondage, whereas the elect, those that are numbered and worthy of being counted and numbered among the elect, that they inherit the place of promise, which is our former estate, which is paradise. And so that's the battle. That's why we are here in the flesh now, is to redetermine our allegiance, whether we choose to serve the Christ and good, or that of Satan and evil. And so, again, tomorrow night, just remember, I will be joined by Andy Hoy, and we will be going over and covering his tabernacle design, which, for those that know, is confirmation of the information that I brought forth in my Flat Earth and Firmament trilogy, and especially the last one, Paradise, the Sides of the North, and the Mount of the Congregation, where I go into great detail as to the structure of our enclosed world system, utilizing the first book of the Legends of the Jews and the story brought forth by the ancient knowledge and the beliefs of the ancient Hebrews, of how the 7 heavens and how the earth comes together in union, establishing the place where the spiritual and material worlds overlap, that this is the place of duality, this is where we experience pain and pleasure, and that it is here on the earth that the forces of good and dark, of light and dark, good and evil, are contending for our spirits and for the eternal souls of humanity. And that depending on how we are and the way that we choose to live, the choices that we make, our intent, our behaviors, and our actions, and those things which are written down continuously every day into the books of life, that it is our own behaviors, it is how we are, how we act, and how we overcome and react to evil and to the choices of doing good or not, that differentiate and that determine whether we will, through grace and through Christ as Savior and Messiah, be counted as apportioned with the wheat or the tares. And the children of the enemy, the adversary, the children of perdition, the sons of Belial, and the children of light, the seed of promise, the children of Adam, the children of the righteous elect, that is no longer just about blood. That one can be born into the Illuminati bloodlines and be born of, the Hamites and the Arab nations, or to the children of perdition with regard to those particular bloodlines that make them up. But it's the choices and it's what we do which really determine. God bless all. Until tomorrow, be blessed.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.